What's up, YouTube? So in this video, we're going to be covering all things inspections because I'm here with my friend Sajag, who is an absolute wizard at inspections amongst all things entrepreneurial. So this is, yeah, you really are. So we're going to go into, like the importance of inspections, but just also, even if you are already getting an inspection, the pitfalls that you can still face with that. So there's quite a lot to really know here, and it can really make or break your business. So for people that don't know you, let's start with like short little intro. Who are you?
Yeah, definitely. So as Matt said, my name is Sajag Agrawal, and actually that's not how you say my last name, but like no one.
How do you say it?
It's like, I think you say it like Agrawal, but like...
You think?
I have no idea.
Cool. Interesting.
It's I should probably figure that out.
Probably should.
But yeah. So a little bit of backstory on me. So I actually started selling on Amazon like 7-8 years ago. And I exited my company last year.
That's super early.
Really early. Started on eBay actually initially. And then I moved into Amazon like 2 years after that. And then I've been like selling on that in the electronics space. So I ran a really pretty decently sized brand, and it was growing really quickly, and we were facing a lot of supply chain issues and things like that, and we had a hard time scaling our supply chain because it was not that effective. So what I actually did is I ended up moving to China, and I lived in China for like 6 months in 2017, and which was really, really insightful because got to see the factories, got to see like the inspections, got to see like freight forwarding, how everything was working. And it was really, really revealing to kind of see how all the inner workings of the supply chain worked.
Yeah.
So, and I ended up opening an office in Shan while I was there too. So that was really interesting. So that's a little bit about my background. And my previous company, the one that I exited last year, that was angel funded. And so we got external funding to grow the company. And now I'm working on Movly, which is a tech company where we're trying to basically streamline and automate the entire supply chain from factory all the way down to last mile in one tech platform.
Yeah. And we've talked about this off the video, and it definitely like blows my mind just the level that you understand supply chain compared to like, especially the typical Amazon seller. You're thinking about this at such a deeper level and like really understanding all the pieces of the puzzle, not just like, placing an order and crossing your fingers that everything arrives safely. So probably a good place to kind of like start is, for the people that are, doing Amazon, newer in Amazon, some people don't get inspections at all. What have you seen go wrong there? Yeah. And like kind of just what's the importance at the baseline of getting an inspection for people?
Definitely. Every company should be doing an inspection right off the bat, like every order. And that's not even coming like, whatever, even if you use a terrible inspection company, it's better to do a terrible inspection versus no inspection at all. Because what I've kind of seen, and I think you've seen this as well, that people literally put, like $10,000, $20,000 into an order and they don't do an inspection. So they don't know if that order was actually made properly or if the labeling was
see it. I've seen some horror stories for sure. Yeah. One quick thing on that is like, people are always concerned about the risk of starting on Amazon, right? And I always say what we're talking about here is your biggest risk. This is basically the only way you could lose all your money for the most part. So it's extremely important.
Yeah, inventory is your biggest expense in Amazon. Like that's why it's so cash intensive.
Exactly. So, and if your inventory is at least valuable, then at least it's an asset in worst case scenario.
Right, and you can at least liquidate it or something. Yeah. Right. Yeah, 100%. So with like what we've noticed, like with people not doing inspections, is like they get products that are, getting to the US. Sometimes they're missing labeling, like you need a made in China label. Sometimes the packaging is missing that labeling. Sometimes there's like a shipping mislabel, so like when the product gets to the, or the carton gets to the port, then it's not like able to be processed properly because the carton doesn't say made in China.
Like those outer labels that say, quantity, weight, all of that. Like, yeah. Because probably some scrappy suppliers just throw it in like a makeshift box and stuff like that.
Exactly. There's small things there, and like, no one catches those because once they go through customs, then it's like, it comes to the US and then they reject it here and then it has to go all the way back and it's like a 2-3 month delay. So that's like some of the smaller stuff, like, small things checking here and there. But the main thing is just making sure the product is done properly. It's like an insurance almost. Yeah. So you're making sure that the product is designed properly, you're making sure the product is created properly. And especially in like times of like trade war and stuff like that, it's even more important because For example, let's say you work with a supplier and you're trying to hammer them down on costs because of the tariffs. Now they're going to try cutting costs by using cheaper raw materials, cheaper manufacturing process.
Yeah.
And then next thing you know, without you even knowing it, those products that you're getting are like slightly lower quality. And if you don't have like a statistical way to measure that, then you don't really know what you're doing. You're kind of just gambling your money.
Yeah.
And, all large companies, like whether you're working with Google, you're working with like any Fortune company doing supply chain, any type of production, everybody does inspections, whether it's made in the US. Often for products made in the US, they do inspections in the 3PL receiving warehouse rather than at the factory location, because, in US there's like a more like higher level of trust.
Yeah.
There's some accountability. But like even very large companies do inspections and do it statistically on every single order.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a process that's built into the supply chain, and it really should not be avoided.
Right. Yeah. I think there's two really interesting things in what you said. One is kind of a general sourcing tip, which I've always thought is, the more you're badgering down on price, they'll find a way to give you the lower price,
right.
But it's not necessarily going to be advantageous to your business. And then the second thing is that, the importance of really inspecting every order. I mean, obviously if you're only going to get one inspection ever, it should be your first one, right. But really one of the biggest values of doing an inspection every time is just that the supplier knows the inspection is coming and they're not going to mess around as much, right. Because they know that this is not going to be approved to leave the factory. We're not going to get our balance payment from the buyer, us, unless this meets up to the requirements that the inspection company is looking for. So, it puts a bit of a little bit of a strain on them in a good way, to right. make them ready for it. So yeah, I mean, extremely important. Yeah, definitely.
But that has to be applied in the same way. And I think that's something we should really dive into this video. But like, if you do not have if your inspection company that you hire doesn't have good accountability, like fraud and bribery are like big issues in China.
Yeah.
So even like Interac and SGS, like I don't want to give any specific things, but I have a friend who worked with both of them. And one time he was at the factory when a inspector came to the factory. This guy was supposed to come like early morning, 9-10 a.m., do an 8-hour inspection and then leave the factory. And he had standards and protocols, and it estimated time is about 8 hours. And he would have spent 8 hours. This is an inspection that's been done before. Mm-hmm. This guy came from a really reputable company and came to the factory like 3 hours late, like noon, demanded lunch from the factory before he did his inspection, which is against like the fraud and bribery procedures for any major company. And then on top of that, did the inspection and left in less than 3 hours.
So yeah, it's just, and what's interesting about that is it's actually bad for both sides. Like right. You as the customer, meaning like the buyer, you're getting screwed too, because you're not getting what you're paying for. And then the factory is like getting bribed. And this is very, very, very common. Like with the supplier that we're now working with, like when I first told them this is a new supplier for me, so it's like everything's new, they don't know. And I was like, oh, like we want to get an inspection right away. They're like, oh, like, we've had bad experiences, we've had, they ask for money, they want this and this. And it's like, they're telling us like, oh, like we'll do the inspection for you, which is like, again, better than nothing. But it's like, you really want an external source, but not only an external source, like it has to be there are very cheap inspection services out there. But you very much get what you pay for, right? I mean, like, what is kind of the difference, say, from like, I'm just curious about this, because there's like kind of that standard tier, which is what, like $300 man day typically, right? What are those ones that are like 100? I mean, what are you getting with those?
So people feel, it's like inspection services are like freight forwarding. Like freight forwarding is also like, there's different freight forwarders. Like some are better than others.
Yeah.
Like some will use air freight and passenger, and then some will use like cargo air freight. And there's, big price difference between the two. Mm-hmm. But like with inspections, they feel like, freight forwarding is like, okay, yeah, there's definitely some large similarities. There's like small differences. You can ask them to do something a certain way. But with inspections, it's not as fluid of a process. It's not something that's standardized. Mm-hmm. So with different inspection companies, you really do get what you pay for. So one of the biggest things that people often have a really big misconception about is that the labor rate in China is like $4 or $5 an hour. And that's not true. it's like a few dollars an hour, like I think like $3 or $4 an hour for worker labor. That's like people who only speak, like I think it's like $2 an hour, $3. I'm not sure what it is, but it's really cheap.
In that range.
Right. But it's for workers that only speak English or only speak Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
They are like they're not like, they're literally robots, right? They like plug in,
Right. Like hard labor, just like factory.
Right.
Type
Exactly.
jobs. Okay.
Exactly. And they have the misconception that, inspection companies like, oh, they paid their inspectors, $5 an hour, and they go for an inspection. It's like 10 hours or 8 hours plus 2 hours transport. Like let's say 10 hours, it's like $50 and they're making, $100 inspection. So making $50 margin. That's not the case. A good inspector who speaks English, which is really high demand, English speaking inspectors in China, those inspectors earn like $10 to $15 an hour before benefits. So when you're doing like $10 or $15 an hour, let's say 15, you're doing 8 hours. That's like, 8 times 10, like that's about 80 plus like 5 times 840. So let's say like 120 right in the labor cost. And then there's an additional cost for auditing. There's an additional cost for booking. There's an additional cost for sales, putting together that report in the back office, transportation costs, accommodations, meals, because they should not be asking the factory for their lunch. That's something that should be provided by the company or brought from the inspector. So there's additional costs associated with that as well. So what those companies do, the ones that do really cheap inspections, is they go to the factory and they only look at a very small subset of units, even if they say they're going to look for a large number of units.
Right.
So you can tell an inspector, hey, I need you, here's like a 7-hour inspection, and I have 3 of these I need you to do today. So what these inspection companies literally do is like what Wells Fargo did previously. They put a quota on the inspector. So they say, okay, hey, you're an inspector. I have 3 inspections you need to do today. You figure it out. You do the inspection. Obviously, they don't want you to, they don't want the inspector to like go to the factory and only spend an hour on the inspection. They want the inspector to do a good inspection. But that inspector also wants to go home. They want to go back to their wife. They want to go back to their kids at the end of the night. And they're not going to do that if they're doing 3 7-hour inspections. So they go, they spend 3 hours, they make up some results, like you can do like 100 units and then multiply everything by 3 for a 300 unit sample size.
Right.
And that's sometimes what they do. And
can we touch on that for a second?
Yeah,
like
definitely.
what because you want to have a statistically significant sample size, right? Can you kind of give like a brief overview of, how do you choose how many units need to be inspected?
That's a really good question. So a lot of people do not know how to choose a sample size, and that's really, really important. I'm glad you asked that question. So when it comes to sample sizes, at least what we use the ISO standard. There's 9001. It's an ISO standard.
I've seen that on labels and stuff.
Exactly. It's an ISO quality control standard. And they have tables that say, okay, hey, this is your production quantity, level 1, level 2, level 3. This is a sample size in that amount. And what we do is we recommend always doing like a level 2 inspection, which is like a normal quantity. For Amazon sellers, we recommend doing level 3 because you have reviews. So you need a higher sample, like you want a lower risk factor.
Exactly.
And then there's like level 1, which is like, okay, hey, like we trust the supplier a little bit. Like that's your like, for your lowest risk products, you would use a level 1 inspection.
Right.
And that's how you kind of choose the sample size. We rely on the ISO tables to do that. Now, if the first inspection fails and you're doing a re-inspection, which is also a lot of times people don't do, always do a re-inspection if your first inspection fails.
Right.
Because if your first inspection fails, your factory is not, your factory already kind of like did not expect for you to like really check the quality of the products the first time. So there's no guarantee they're going to create a really good product the second time. And they might just say, oh, it's fixed, ship it. And it's always good to do re-inspection. But for re-inspections, we always recommend going a little bit bigger on the sample size. So if you did a level 2,
right,
do a level 3 on the sample size, and then the acceptable quality limits, which is the number of allowed major or minor defects and critical defects, those should also shrink down for the same level of the sample size.
So like say that level 2, what is that roughly in terms of like a percentage? Like is that like 5-10% of units?
So it's really, really hard to say.
Or it varies basically.
It really varies, yeah. So I think like for 2,000 units, like this is off the top of my head, so this might be like really, really off. But like for 2,000 units, I believe it's like 300 for like a level 3 and like 215 for like a level 2.
Okay.
So I'm not 100% sure.
But in that range, yeah.
I don't have the table memorized. So I have no idea.
Yeah, right. It's interesting. Just comes to mind like with with like my new product that we're like working on, is because it's such a small. It's such a high, like it has to be, every unit has to be perfect, right? And it's like, so there's basically like zero margin for error. And since the volume is so low, in that case, it probably makes sense to just do like a 100% inspection, right?
I mean, 100% inspections, you can do it. Like, you know,
but if you're dealing with low units, like in my case the one that we're talking about like off is, not sort of like your typical Amazon, like 3,000 units or something that, you know?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're doing like a low production volume, especially if it's like your first batch, you're doing like 100 units, then you can do 100%. That's a really good idea. Yeah. But like if you're doing like a large number of units, like 1,000 plus or like 2,000 plus, a lot of people want to do 100% inspections, and actually
not at that level. It's too much.
It doesn't make much sense because you already have like a statistically significant number.
Exactly.
So, you know, as long as it reaches the thresholds for that, and the sampling is done properly, it really comes down to the process.
Right.
So the process has to be executed. They have to look at multiple different cartons. They cannot just take the ones at the front.
Exactly. So it has to be like statistically randomized. Yeah. The only reason I brought up that weird example is just because it's it's $1,000 product. It's very low volume. There's like, if one customer receives a bad one, it would be like very devastating, because it's like such a high touch sort of product. So I think it's not a typical case, but
definitely. For luxury products, also bump it up a little bit.
This is almost like that in a way, like you can't have, you can't have like a Rolex watch show up with like any quality defect, right?
Exactly.
At all.
And that's a really good way to think about it, actually. So a lot of times when we talk to like clients about like booking inspections, we like to look at it on a per unit cost. So if you're selling $100 product and your product costs $25 to make, doing an inspection might cost you an extra 5 cents per unit. Does that 5 cents really matter? Or another 20 cents on a $25 product to make sure that your product is delivered and you're not going to have any quality control issues? It should be it should be a cost in the supply chain.
Like literally you should think of it as part of your product cost.
Exactly.
Like it just has to be in there.
Right.
And especially like if you're dealing with any product where like people don't realize when they're getting into e-commerce for the first time that there's different levels of risks with different products. Like you mentioned electronics, or I'm talking about this like high-end car part, like some products might be very more simple, but you have to kind of factor that in, even in your product selection, is thinking about, what is the potential defect rate for this product? How expensive is this going to be to make sure everything is done properly at every step of the way? I do want to get into Movly specifically,
definitely,
just because neither of us we're not just like pushing this, but really like what you guys are doing with it is different, So I want to like understand. You've told me off the video, and it's crazy, but like maybe let's talk on the report stuff. Like what are you showing in a report that you would not typically get in a report? Or if you have a better question. Yeah,
that's a great way of starting out. So in terms of like the report, I would say that the first biggest thing that is really different about our reports is we have a factory overview in the front. And so factory overview, like a lot of inspection companies do it. They go to the factory, they take a couple of pictures, and they're like, okay, here's a factory overview. But we actually ask the factory for their business license. We take down their business license number, their expiration date. We also take down their employee counts and separate it by department. So if the thinking behind it is that, if you're a supply chain analyst, or even you're working on your own product, like this is for everybody. You don't have a lot of visibility into your supplier. And you can do a factory audit, but those are a little bit expensive, and you might do them like once a year. Or
I was going to say, it sounds like, because they're like with these typical inspection services, that's like a whole separate inspection you can pay for. Right. Which and I don't know any Amazon seller that's ever paid for one of those.
It really should be done. Like if you talk to really like some high level like Amazon sellers doing like consistent, really large volumes from certain suppliers, it starts to become almost necessary to like have a factory audit like done annually or semi-annually. And so with factory audits, that's something that we wanted to offer, but actually because it's such a separate service and we have to have really specialized trained people and a really separate process to do that, we've not actually launched that service. But even if you're working with another provider for a factory audit, the thing is that factory audits are expensive and you can't really tell like when it's necessary. So with what we've done with the inspections is we've taken something that any inspector can do, which is just collect a little bit of data and put it into the report. That's real time from the factory. So if there's a sudden jump in employees from year 1 to year 2, or inspection 1 to inspection 2, if your employee went from 100 to 150 or 100 to 80, then it's like, hey, this went down or this went up. This is a red flag. This factory is growing too quickly. They might not put good quality on my products.
Whoa, yeah.
Yeah. Or if
I've never even thought of that really.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
then like, if it shrunk like from 100 to 80 employees, it's like, okay, hey, this factory is not doing so well. We need to move to another supplier. And so that's really key as well. And then we also look at like some major products, major customers, and like the production line, what the capacity is. That's a quoted capacity. We don't actually measure that because it's not an audit, but we check up on that and put that in the report. So then you have some real-time comparison between that. And another thing we really do is for during production inspections. So for during production inspections, we actually look at the production line and document each step. So step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and put it into a report.
That's super valuable to like really know how your product is made.
Right.
Like I feel like most sellers, most manufacturers, most brands of products, they don't really understand the process. And, I think that's been a valuable skill for me to learn as an e-commerce seller, is just like, learning a little bit about actual product, not being an engineer necessarily, but understanding the processes, because then you'll realize it's like, this type of logo printing always ends up being an issue or something like that. Like to kind of understand like, oh, well, wait, you guys are doing this before that, like that's going to cause issues or something like that. Yeah.
And it's also good because like if the factory forgets a quality control step or changes a part around, maybe the manufacturing step went from 2 to 5, it kind of gets you thinking like, okay, why did this move from 2 to number 5? Why did this QC step disappear? Why are there 7 steps in this production run and 5 steps in the next production run? So it makes you kind of wonder. So is the factory trying to skip costs? Are they changing, the components, whatever? So you have some more data and some insights.
Yeah.
And that's for like higher risk products. But it also can be really helpful even for like low risk, like pots and pans, because sometimes, even the coating, like there's a process that goes into everything.
Oh yeah.
And even if you do it for one run, it's good to know like, okay, this is how my product is made. And then you have that information and you can go to another factory and say, hey, this is the production line. What steps do you do or what steps do you not do compared to this? And then they'll tell you, hey, we do an extra 3 steps or we do an extra less 2 steps. And then
that's incredibly smart, because that would allow you to have consistency with different suppliers. And also when a supplier, consistency is, not implied by working with the same supplier. Like I've had this happen for sure. I've had, products show up that are different later on, different steps. And like, that makes perfect sense. Like they change the way where they're sourcing things. They're leaving out steps. So having that even documented is massive value.
Exactly. Yeah. Wow. Like I can't tell you how many times I speak to people and they're like, okay, our supplier, we need to move suppliers, but we can't get the same quality of the product, or we can't have the same product made the exact same way. There's some like little differences, subtle differences, but they will affect our product and our reviews. And it's like, okay, hey, this is what you need to do. Like you should have had documentation from day one. So when you talk to your suppliers, even in the negotiation standpoint, you can already talk and know what you're talking about in terms of the process for manufacturing. You can ask them, okay, where do you do your QC checks? Where do you do you do this coding step? And then you can know, okay, this is exactly how my product is made. And so that could be really powerful. And I think one other element that I think is really important to emphasize when it comes to doing the inspections is that the inspections have to be done in a way that the communication is done correctly. And I feel that's really one lacking area that our reports are really good at. So we have really easy to read reports. We separate it out into parts and sections, which no other company does. And we just break it down and make it really readable. The thinking is that, we're all human. Like you're human, I'm human. I don't want to be reading, matrix code out of, this inspection report and trying to find information. So we lay things out really easily and really well. And when it comes to product tests and measuring things, it's also really important that the communication is done properly. So we have a native English speaking back office in the Philippines, which actually lets us do a higher quality like translation of inspection specifications and making sure that they're understandable in layman terms to an inspector and everything makes sense, than working with a Chinese inspection company. Because Chinese people are good at speaking English, but it's not native. Whereas in the Philippines, it's like a native experience for the back office staff. So they essentially help communicate all the requirements to the ground in China. And if the Chinese inspectors have any issues during the inspection, they can contact our operations manager. And if the operations manager has any issues, then they contact our back office. And then the back office can help facilitate that and make sure that the correct specifications are sent out to the inspector in real time. And that's like, so no one else does that. And that's really key, because basically that makes sure that, hey, if I say I want my test to be XYZ, the inspector doesn't come and do A, B, C, and
Right.
and you have no idea.
Rather than just scrap some crap together and write it down and send it off, you're like
Right.
kind of actively making sure everything is going well. And as far as the reports, will either that would have just been popping up, or we'll have a link or something to an example report.
Definitely.
So people can
I'll
see like,
include one.
the differences from like, your typical report. And what are some of like the typical failure points that you'll see in an inspection, like reasons for something to be declined?
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the biggest fail points for inspections, like the reason that they don't go well, is the fact that the process for inspections has not been systematically correct historically. So one of the biggest things for inspections is like, if you take any inspection company right now, even some of the top tier ones, and I don't want to name names because that puts me in a really bad position, but I like some of the most reputable firms you'll work with, you can tell them, hey, I have a 1,000 lamps I want to test. And out of those 1,000 lamps, 950 of them might be defective. And your sample size might be 300. And you might tell them, hey, I want you to plug in and test all 300 lamps because that's the simple function of the lamp. It needs to plug in a bulb and it works. So the inspector will go to the factory and actually only visually look at the product. So they'll look at 300, they'll open up some random boxes, and they'll say, oh, the lamps look good. And then, right. And then when it comes to the product test to plug it in, even if you ask them to do 300, which they will say, yes, we'll do. And, you can set it in there, in like the booking, you can tell them, okay, hey, test all 300 lamps. The booking departments of these inspection companies will not increase the price because they don't take into account the extra time to do that. So whether you're doing 5 minutes,
that makes no sense, right?
Exactly.
It's like, because when you're booking an inspection with a good company, you can lay out your own tests. You can be like, make sure this functions, make sure this measurement is correct, make sure you can drop it like this, or like you can literally outline your exact tests, and then somehow the price is still the same. Like how?
It's like this is like, if I did this myself, this would take me
10 times longer.
And they're like, it's same price. Just pay us one day or whatever, and it's done. And that's not how it should work, because literally, even though they say we're going to test 300 units and plug them in, they literally go to the factory, and the operation manual, the training manuals for the inspectors say each product test 3 units. So even if you told them test 300 units, the inspector is trained to only go to the factory, plug in 3 of your lamps. And if you plug in 3 lamps from the box in the front, because the factory put it there, the factory bought you lunch and said, okay, hey, test this lamp.
Here are the samples for you.
Here are the samples for you. And even if they don't bribe you, they just put it in the front. The inspector is lazy. They pick up, one of the first few boxes. Half of them could be working, half of them could be defective. So the first half could be good. They literally just open the box and they plug in 3 units. It works. And you'll get a pass on a 950 out of 1,000 defective lamp order.
Yeah. Geez, that would be a disaster.
Yeah. And it's happened. It's happened quite a few times. Like a lot of times clients come to us after they got screwed over through like something like this. Like this is not a real world example. I feel like this is an easy way to explain it. But like this is like something that's happened from like, low tech products, like from pots and pans all the way down to like electronics. It's like, it's the whole range.
Yeah, no, I totally believe it. I mean, just from the sample size that I've seen in my own products, or with, people that I talk with, like I totally have seen this for sure. And before we let people know where to find you, because I really think you guys are doing super interesting things in this space, I want for everyone watching to like hear about the tech side a little bit more. So
definitely.
Let's touch on that, and then we'll let people know like where to find this.
Yeah, so inspections have traditionally been like a low tech thing. You get a PDF report and that's it. This has been going on for like decades. So what we've been working on doing is our platform for inspections, that part of the platform we're building, we're essentially trying to streamline the entire process. So for the booking process, we want to, when you put in your products and you choose your categories, and we do this even now manually as we're building out the tech platform. But the goal is that as we build out that tech platform, we can provide recommendations. So whether you saw on Amazon, you saw it in brick and mortar, we can provide sample size recommendations based on your previous history for inspections and previous history of like pass and fail rates. And in addition to that, we can also provide some recommended tests that you can do for your own products, all in the portal on the booking side. And then when it comes to the execution, this is the really cool stuff, because paper reports are still okay. That's why they've been there for decades. Like, people can still use it, even though we can make it better. But one of the biggest things on the tech side is that we've been creating a system that allows us to manage all the inspection processes. So we can see if certain inspectors have like a higher pass rate or a higher fail rate, what if they're reporting higher number of defects, if they have like some issues in behavior, whatever. We have all of this recorded, streamlined, and put into a data analytics platform. So we can actually track everything that's happening from start to finish in the entire inspection process in real time and with videos. And we're also looking to do body cameras in the future and things like that. So
that's incredible. Yeah. And that's so fascinating about like almost being like a supplier database in the future, like to have all of these stats on, all the different factories and things like that. And body cam sounds sweet.
And and if a supplier that you also use and 5 of your competitors that we also do inspections for use, potentially in the future, we can automatically recommend to do higher level of sample sizes because this guy has a higher fail rate. Yeah. And we can also cycle out inspectors. We can keep track of which inspectors are going to which factories and things like that. And it gives us abilities to monitor and make sure inspections are working properly to a degree that no other company in the space can do.
Yeah, and I'm personally seeing it. I mean, we're setting up an inspection right now together, and just even like the onboarding process is, rather than another one where you just like click buy inspection and then you're like, well, is it happening? Is it what? Like just the sort of setup process it's very obvious that you guys are thinking about, like what are the unique circumstances of this situation and, what is the goal of this inspection? And that's great. So yeah, I mean, I think other than that, just where do we send people?
Yeah, you guys can find us at Movley. So that's MOVLEY.com. And when you fill out the form, the Get Started form, or you fill out the Talk with an Expert form, just mention Matt Loberstein, and we have a great discount for people that come in through Matt's video.
Oh, dang. I didn't realize we were doing a discount. That's awesome. Yeah. So then I genuinely think this is the way to go. I think that you guys are going to just like dominate this space. Like I genuinely believe that. So, this is not just having on some random inspection company. Like I don't do that type of thing, but I really believe in what you guys are doing. So I think anyone looking for an inspection, which should be probably everybody, if you're watching a video like this, I really think that it's worth talking to these guys, and their process is just different. So yeah, thanks for sharing all that.
Definitely. Saying bye from LA, I guess.
Peace.
Peace.
Sweet.